When the first headlines about Menglong's passing appeared, many people had the same instinctive response. A sharp moment of shock, followed by a heavy silence. The official explanation arrived quickly, but instead of bringing peace, it seemed to leave behind a quiet echo of unanswered questions. Viewers were grieving, yet somehow also unsettled, as if the story had missing pages. In most cases, public attention fades after the initial wave of emotion. People move on, new stories appear, and a tragic event slowly becomes a distant memory. But this time that familiar script did not play out. Instead of letting the case sink into the background, a part of the public felt an unusual kind of pull. It was not anger in the loud, explosive sense. It was something quieter but perhaps even stronger. A feeling that they could not simply close the book and pretend everything was clear. From this space of discomfort, a new kind of courage began to grow. It was not the courage of heroes on a stage, but the everyday bravery of ordinary people who chose to think more deeply when it would have been easier to look away. Some started by collecting screenshots and saving links. Others reread timelines not to accuse but to understand. They talked to each other not as fans chasing drama, but as human beings trying to honor someone who seemed to deserve a clearer narrative than a single line about a fall. This transformation, from passive sadness to active reflection, is where the real story begins. The shock did not simply freeze people in pain. It pushed them towards a delicate kind of courage. It is the courage to say, "We do not know everything but we want to learn," and to hold that position without shouting, without accusing, and without forgetting that at the center of it all is a life that has ended, and a family that must live with that reality every day. In the past, investigations belonged almost exclusively to institutions. Forensic science, data analysis and reconstruction of events were tools we associated with police, lawyers and experts in white coats working behind closed doors. Ordinary people were expected to watch from afar, to accept official statements and to trust that whatever needed to be examined would be examined by those in charge. But the world has changed. With a smartphone in hand, a stable internet connection and access to open databases, ordinary viewers now have the ability to revisit details that, in another era, would have simply passed them by. It is from this new reality that something remarkable emerged in Menglong's case. What observers began to call people's forensics. These were not professionals with badges or uniforms. They were office workers, students, parents, and especially groups of women who gathered their courage, boarded trains or planes, and traveled to the places linked to use final days. They did not carry laboratory equipment. Instead, they brought notebooks, recording devices, and a quiet determination to use what they had: time, attention, and empathy. They stood in the courtyards mentioned in online discussions, listening to how sound traveled between buildings, feeling the wind, watching how shadows moved along walls at different hours of the day. Back home, they opened weather archives and compared rainfall patterns with the sound of raindrops in certain videos. They studied the length and direction of shadows in available footage, not to play detective for entertainment, but to see whether the pieces of information formed a coherent picture. This was not forensic work in the strict legal sense, but it was something deeply human. An attempt to bring structure, care, and method to a situation that felt clouded. Their 40-page report did not claim to be conclusive. Instead, it showed how far ordinary people have come in their ability to read the digital world around them. People's forensics is not about replacing experts. It is about citizens learning to think carefully, to handle data responsibly, and to remind institutions that they are quietly watching, listening, and remembering. As the independent report circulated, it did not explode with accusations. Instead, it whispered questions. One of the most discussed sections was the suggestion that the timeline of Menglong's passing might not fully match the dates that had been widely shared. By aligning meteorological data with the sounds and visuals in publicly available recordings, the authors proposed the possibility of a different sequence of events. This possibility, carefully framed as a hypothesis rather than a verdict, was enough to stir the public imagination. A potential gap of 1 or 2 days can feel small in ordinary life, but in the context of an unexplained loss, it becomes charged with meaning. People began to wonder what might have happened during that time, if the gap truly existed at all. Was it a simple administrative delay, a moment of internal confusion, or something more complex that no one outside the situation could fully grasp? Another observation in the report concerned the digital visibility of certain locations connected, in the public narrative, to use final days. When viewers noticed that a known headquarters seemed difficult to find on some mapping services, questions naturally arose. Was this an issue of privacy settings, software updates, or standard corporate discretion? Or was it simply one of those strange technical coincidences that occur more often than we imagine? The report did not answer these questions. It simply laid them out quietly and carefully. With every new clue, however tentative, came a new weight of responsibility. The authors understood that information, once shared widely, can easily be misused or misinterpreted. They repeatedly reminded readers that their work was based on open sources, that they had no access to official files, and that they could not replace a formal investigation. This humility is easy to overlook, yet it is precisely what gives their work a different kind of integrity. For the wider public, this moment marked an important shift. Consuming a story and participating in its reconstruction are not the same thing. To step into the second role is to accept a subtle burden. To be fair, to be patient, and to resist the temptation of simple, dramatic answers. New clues will always generate new questions, but they should also generate a deeper sense of responsibility in how we handle those questions, and how we treat the people, living and deceased, who are at the heart of the story. What happened around Menglong's case did not stop at a single report. For many people, the emotional impact of his passing, combined with the unresolved feelings surrounding it, became the starting point for something more lasting than discussion threads and trending topics. Instead of letting their sadness harden into bitterness, some viewers chose to transform it into action, small, steady, and surprisingly creative. One form this took was the building of informal digital archives. In a world where posts can be edited or removed without warning, groups of volunteers quietly began to save articles, screenshots, and timelines in shared folders. Their aim was not to stockpile material for sensationalism, but to ensure that important information did not simply vanish into the digital void. In doing so, they created a kind of collective memory, a resource that future readers can examine with their own eyes and minds. Others turned towards education and reflection. They formed online study rooms, spaces where people discuss not just the details of the case, but also how to read media more critically. They asked questions such as, how can we check if a source is reliable? How do we avoid being driven purely by emotion? How can we talk about sensitive topics without causing harm? These conversations may not be loud, but they have a quiet power. They strengthen the ability of ordinary citizens to navigate complex stories more wisely. Art has also become a profound outlet. Fans have created drawings, letters, music, and short videos to honor Yu's work and personality. In these creations, he is not only a figure in a controversial case, but a person remembered for gentleness, professionalism, and the impact of his roles. This focus helps to restore something essential that can be lost when a life is reduced to a single tragic headline. The richness of a career, the warmth of a smile, the inspiration he brought to others. There is another, perhaps unexpected, project growing from this experience: an increased awareness of emotional well-being. Viewers have begun connecting Yu's story with wider conversations about pressure in the entertainment industry, the difficulty of living under constant public scrutiny, and the need for stronger support systems for both artists and fans. In this way, the pain surrounding his passing becomes not only a wound, but also a motivation to build communities that are kinder, more attentive, and more protective of those who stand in the spotlight.